All right, without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome the Shift team to talk about how we helped with the code observability revolution at Shift. In terms of your hosts today, we have Nandita from the Sentry team. She's on the solutions engineering team. And then from Shift, we have Aaron Chu, who is our Senior Director of Tech Ops, and Karan Gupta, who is the CTO at Shift. And I will let Karan take it away.
Hey, thanks, Dorothy. Hey, everybody. Thank you all for joining. So I'm, like she said, I'm Karan Gupta, CTO of Shift.com. So before we dive in, I do want to thank the Sentry team for organizing this event and hosting us. I mean, it's great to be here. Happy to share our story, happy to share our lessons learned. What do we do at Shift, right? You'll see this in the video in a quick second. But I just want to let you know, so at Shift, we're shaping the future of automotive e-commerce, right? It sounds pretty big, but so we're so used to buying and selling things online now, right? Like almost everything. But cars, trucks, things like that, they're still largely a brick and mortar experience. So that's where we come in. We remove the traditional pain points from the car buying and selling process, right? So if you're looking to buy a car or sell one, you don't need to walk into a dealer, or if you're in America, you don't need to head to Craigslist. You can do it all from home with Shift. If you're looking to buy a car, we'll actually bring the car to your driveway and you can test drive it around your house. These are the kinds of things like we're building today that will be just considered normal like a few years from now. So I'm really excited to be a part of that. Like that's, it's a rare opportunity, to get that. So with that, I think now, like with that context, maybe we should play the video. What do you think, Dorothy?
When you buy a great used car with Shift. Of course, if you really want to waste a bunch of money on a brand new car, you can just do this. Now, technically, that's littering, so I'm going to go back and pick all that up.
Shift.com. Used cars never felt so new.
Thanks. So I wonder how many people actually recognize that actor. And we'll see if we have some fans. So I was really excited when we picked Martin Starr. It was awesome. Anyway, we can move to the next slide.
When you buy a brand new car.
Sorry.
No worries. Yeah. So a little bit of context, right, about Shift and our setup and our technology culture. So I started here right when the lockdown happened in the March of 2020. So it's kind of a curious time to start. And then Aaron joined me shortly after. And we spent our time improving the business through tech and really establishing engineering best practices. So Shift, like in this space, like Shift is a tech first company, right? There's obviously when you're moving goods and when you're in e-commerce, there is an operations component, which is really important. But the way we are trying to establish ourselves and the way we are really impacting the business is through the things that we do through technology. So how we organized, we have our version of the Spotify model, which has been great. So if you don't know it, you should definitely study it and see if you can apply it to your company. But the tech org is structured into tribes, squads, and guilds. This allows each team to own an area of the business and move quickly full stack. So for example, we have a team that really focuses on the seller side of the business, people who want to sell cars to us. So they have a PM who's the CEO of that area, just so to speak. And so they don't need to make a lot of cross-functional, collaborative meetings and so on. They can move really quickly. So that's been really beneficial for us. We also practice a you build it, you run it culture. So, teams don't just build their code and, throw it over the fence to DevOps. There is a lot of collaboration between the teams, a lot of reusability in terms of how we set up our infrastructure, how we, actually observe the features once they're put into production. And another thing I want to call out is, we are moving from a large legacy monolith to a much more efficient service-oriented architecture. You can call it microservices, but like it's kind of like borderline between microservices versus just being service-oriented. So we can talk more about that if you have questions. We definitely leverage AWS and we leverage, some amazing partners like Sentry wherever we can. we can move to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So just a quick call out. We are growing and we are hiring across the board. We went public in 2020. And since then, we have definitely doubled the Eng team along with many other teams across the company. And we have a really solid, really positive engineering culture. Everyone's really supportive. You come in, you get a buddy who helps you ramp up. So if all of this, it sounds exciting to you, you should definitely come and check us out. And if you want to know more, hit us up directly. Yeah, but I'm gonna now hand it over to Aaron to talk more through our integration.
All right. Thanks, Karan, and thanks Sentry team for putting this together as well. It was a great process putting together this presentation and getting ready for this with you guys. So let's take a look at Shift in 2020. Again, as Karan mentioned, this was right after pandemic set in. He joined and I joined shortly after. The business was really kind of getting back on its feet after, as any business was, really getting back on its feet after after COVID really took effect. And we came in and started assessing everything within engineering. So what we had was to start was a monolith based in Go, right? A very, very custom monolith and a very custom set of development practices. There were over 1 million lines of code in this monolith. We had a custom object relational model that uses Postgres like an object store. We had a custom submit queue also, which would take like 4 different pull requests at a time and submit them together for deployment. And finally, we had a custom error reporting system, which I'm going to talk about today with you guys. And we'll talk about its challenges and how we evolved that. For context, the engineering team at that time was about 50 engineers. And when you looked at who was actually using the tool set that we did have for monitoring errors, for monitoring other things like request rates and metrics and stuff like that, there was only a handful of people due to access issues or just complexity of the implementation. It was confusing enough so that a lot of people just weren't observing things. And the essential part of it is that people weren't observing their releases. They weren't even aware sometimes that their software shipped. It's not a great place to be. Like if you were an engineer, you submit your code for testing and deployment, you don't even know when it's going to release, and perhaps it releases a day later. You're not going to know when it's causing a whole bunch of errors when it actually hits, and certainly won't be there to respond to them if that happens. So let's dive in. Let's take a look at on the next slide. Let's take a look at what we had. So this Go-based monolith had an internal library that would log to Stackdriver logging. So Stackdriver is the monitoring suite within Google PubSub. We were on AWS, but I won't go into why that is. It would log these messages tagged with a request ID. So there's a unique request ID for every single request that comes through the system. And if an error was emitted by this request or as part of this request, an event would get emitted into the PubSub topic that's in GCP. Now a consumer will go pick up that, consume those events in the PubSub topic. It will then
we might have lost Aaron for a second. We'll give him a sec to come back. Thanks, guys, for your patience. The beauty of live workshops.
Oh, no worries. This is happens from time to time.
Yeah.
We'll join in a second. Yeah, so the way it used to work was, this was as you can imagine, a company that started out. They started out with the monolith, and then you start, as the business grows, you start adding more and more technology to it. And occasionally it can be really hard to figure out, your build versus buy, like what's the boundary? And so that's kind of what happened. Like it's very it's normal and natural. Like many companies go through this, right? So that's kind of the same thing that happened here. We built a custom solution, which was scaling for some time, but over time, as you realize, things get more difficult, and then you have to start thinking about, okay, do we still invest more in this particular infrastructure and improve it, somehow streamline it, or is it time to make a leap to something else that's maybe much better structured for the next many years? And so in the next few slides, you'll see like that's kind of what we did. A lot of focus on making the leap to, hey, what's going to be the best thing for us for the next many years to come. But Aaron's back, so I'll let him kind of continue where he dropped off. So.
Hey guys, I'm sorry. My internet actually went down, so I'm on cellular right now. I'm sorry. So what was the last part that we all heard? I can continue from there.
Just around Aaron, you were talking about the pub sub topics in the consumer. So
okay, cool. So this Google pub sub topic is of course maintaining a queue of events of errors that come through, and we have a consumer that's built into the same Go monolith that will, upon consuming an event from that pub sub queue, go to Stackdriver logging and pull the relevant logs for that error from that request ID. Using information within that request, within the logs, it will go and submit, it will go and send an email to a Google group that's relevant to that particular error. And those were determined largely by what squad you were on. So if you were in a particular squad, you would be subscribed to that Google group, and you would get errors that are relevant to that area of discipline for your particular squad. So let's move to the next slide. Yeah, great, thank you. So there's a couple problems with this, of course, and I'm sure that a lot of folks listening here can kind of tell. Looking at errors in email is not the greatest thing in the world. It's certainly something where we could find a more sophisticated solution, and over here, think through whether or not you can determine what's important to look at using this interface. Secondly, we had some issues in scaling with Stackdriver logging, and if we go to the next slide, we can talk through some of that stuff. Stackdriver logging has a rate limit for the read API. So if you're going to read a set of logs from Stackdriver logging, you can't do it faster than 60 times per minute. This is a rate limit where you cannot actually increase it, because that's just not how Stackdriver logging was meant to be used. If you emit errors greater than 60 per minute, well, that absolutely can happen, right? Either you are emitting errors that should be warnings, or you have a large scale event and it's just a flood of hundreds of thousands or even millions of events. You're going to back up that queue. But that means a couple different things. I'll call a few things out that actually happened to us. At a constant basis, we were pretty backed up in this queue. You may not be getting these error emails until like 7 days later, something crazy like that. And if the backup was really bad, then GCP PubSub will actually start dropping your events. There's a retention period in GCP PubSub subscriptions of 2 weeks. So if you're backed up that far, you're just going to lose data. But perhaps like the worst thing is that when you need to go and answer a question, say Karan comes to me and says like, hey, how are we doing? Are we having any big problems? I can't answer that question. But if I want to answer that question, what do I need to do? I need to purge that PubSub queue. I need to delete data to find out what's going on right now, which is terrible. That's a very bad place to be. And so coupled with the obvious UI deficiencies, we were kind of in a bad spot. So let's move to the next slide. Largely,
Aaron, if you want to go off camera too, I know your internet is a little spotty, so you're welcome to just do voice if that's easiest. Sorry.
I think the lag is probably, if the lag feels okay right now. So I think the cellular in my ear is not too bad, right? Are you
it's a little spotty, but we can still hear you.
Okay, let me stop the video then. All right, cool. So where were we at this point, right? So we were at a point where, you know, I call it like we're bleeding and we don't know how bad it is, right? We certainly couldn't tell how well we were doing at any given time. Engineers quite simply stopped responding to alerts, which was a very bad place to be. And various different suggestions came about. I mean, it was great that people were kind of standing up to say, like, look, what can we do about this? How can we get around this problem? And there were various different suggestions. One of them was to break down the errors into smaller Google groups, right? And tackle those and then move on to the next one. And a particular hardline approach was suggested too, where it was like, if you can't see all the errors because they're rate limited, well, then fix some. And then you'll see the next ones. You know, these are things that we definitely didn't find were productive or helpful to us. So we took a look at what we really needed. So if we go to the next slide, what do we really want out of an error reporting system? Well, we want to see everything. We've got to see everything. We need to see them in real time. We need to be able to ingest these as fast as we're emitting them. And then we also need to be able to slice and dice the data to be able to prioritize what needs to be handled first. What's an emergency based upon the urgency, and what's important to solve because it is a particularly egregious error that involves something like maybe we're charging the wrong amount of money to people or something like that, right? And then lastly, the guidance that Karan and myself gave to the rest of the team was that our job here is to make the car buying and selling experience phenomenal and at scale. And it's not to go and solve the engineering problems behind making an error reporting system, which is really important to get through to everybody. And that's one of the very common themes that we had seen throughout our time here. So how do we do this? Let's move to the next slide. We found that Sentry was actually receiving errors, but at the end of this chain from this pub sub consumer. So whenever an email was submitted, was sent, Sentry would also receive an event, an error. We had some problems with it though. It was a custom client, right? So we were actually using the Sentry event ingestion time as the error time, as opposed to that time that the error actually occurred. So naturally, all of our graphs were kind of wrong in a sense. But people quickly realized that, look, hey, check out this UI. You can actually break things down and, you know, prioritize your errors and see how bad things are. And they're like, that's great, we want that, but we don't have all the data. So the next guidance that we had for folks, if we go to the next slide, was to just go and get the Sentry library. Go get it, implement it using the instructions, do nothing more, just do it by the book. And suddenly we had it. Suddenly we had all of our alerts coming in. We could break things down. We really understood what was going on all the time in real time. And people were able to go and prioritize things and start responding to things. And that was a really great place to be. If we go to the next slide, we got rid of the rest of it. Deleting code feels so good sometimes. And that's it's a great thing to do. So let's take a big picture look at where we were at. This was probably a good picture for where we were at the beginning of the year. You know, we pushed a lot of other best practices, including 12-factor methodology, extracting all secrets from code, taking our internal services off the internet, and of course, observability. Sentry with Sentry and with Datadog now, we can monitor this monolith properly. We have the full set of tools, APM, logging, errors, of course, all this stuff. And we're able to look at all of our problems, all of the signals at scale. We're not missing anything. And it's great. All of our new services work the same way as well. We have almost a single pane of glass for monitoring here at Shift. What's great about this, we don't need to train engineers how to use these tools. They get it. They just hop in there and they see the familiar buttons, graphs, breakdowns. There's no training necessary there. They set their own alerts and they set their own thresholds, and we never even need to tell them to do that. They understand that when they build something, they're going to run it. Furthermore, where there's no training necessary needed to implement these tools. We have template repos. For instance, if you need to spin up a new Rails service, we have a template repo for that, and the integration is already done in that repo. But if we need to do a new integration, the guidance is the same, just pick up the instructions and use those. And you know, we don't need to be reinventing the wheel there. And engineers are actually observing the releases now. Everybody has access to stuff. Everybody understands the tool set, and that's great. So let's take a quick peek at how we do alerting on the next slide. So engineers have preferred here to do alerting via Slack. And what's nice about that is that they can watch what happens when they release code. If they're actively watching, it doesn't make sense for them to page an on-call engineer. That would just make their life hell. And so this is their method of choice, which is great. They can go and set their alerts using the rich rule system that you see in this in the screenshot over here. And yeah, there are a couple of ways to interact with the alert directly from within Slack, which is great. So let's move to the next slide. Oh, we skipped one. Let me hop back a bit. Yeah, there you go. So the contrast is pretty stark here, right? If you're looking at the blob of text and email on the left side versus the interface that you see on the right side, it's pretty clear which one is more superior. In particular, like looking at releases and digging down into the actual code contribution that caused an error, or the first release where an error actually started occurring, is really valuable to us. There's so much other information that enriches the experience and makes it faster for us to find out what's going on with a given error. So that part was great. Engineers on their own started using additional features. We didn't even have to ask them to do this, but they enabled performance monitoring as well as mobile application monitoring. It's always great to kind of get stuff for free, right? And then, so let's talk about what's coming up next for Shift. Obviously, there's a lot of development going on. Karan spoke about how the team is growing. We are more than 100 strong right now, and we're going to continue growing like crazy, right? This is just the engineering team I'm talking about. And we're going to continue investing in machine learning. Machine learning observability is going to be great. We obviously can log errors into Sentry from our ML inference models, but we can also do things like monitor performance. So as we start to pick up things like TensorFlow models, which take a little longer to produce results, we can have that as part of the package as well. Lambda, Python, and more. Like there are additional platforms, languages, or frameworks that we're going to be looking at adopting, and you know, we'll absolutely look to plug those in as well. We have APM within Datadog, and it'd be great to have an additional view for distributed tracing within Sentry as well, because that is also part of what comes as part of the package. You know, having multiple views on something that presents like, you know, ability to do not only validation, but if you can observe something in a little bit of a different way, sometimes that's helpful too. Finally, ticketing systems integrations. If we are able to, well, by using this, we can, you know, make sure that people follow up on errors, so that we develop a better discipline for just making sure that we take care of our systems, right? And that's there's a good amount of value in there too. And with that, that's about all I had. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Aaron. I think we'll pass it off to Nandita now to talk about Sentry.
Awesome. Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. One second. Cool. There I'll just close out all of these. Okay, awesome. Hoping everyone can see my screen right now. Okay, gonna take that as a yes.
We can see it.
Awesome, cool, great, yeah. Yeah, just to kind of introduce myself again, in case you forgot from the beginning, my name is Nandita. I'm one of the solutions engineers here at Sentry. And essentially what we're gonna be kind of focusing on for this next portion of the workshop is some of the maybe newer features, as well as tools that you could utilize to create a more holistic and complete application monitoring solution for your product. So as we saw in Aaron and Karan's demo, Sentry does have the ability to, of course, surface errors in real time, help speed up your time to resolution, and help you prioritize the right issues. But beyond that, there's performance, distributed tracing, as well as a couple other features such as Discover and dashboards that can really help you kind of go beyond just kind of the surface level features that Sentry can provide you. So that's essentially what we're going to be focusing on. So distributed tracing, our performance product, as well as some of the new feature updates, and then kind of close it out on my end, talking about our Discover and dashboards feature. So just to kind of get things started, so in terms of performance, you may be familiar with this product, but just to kind of give a high level overview, in terms of enabling performance monitoring with Sentry, it's with the same SDK. There isn't much to it in terms of configuration. All you need is the appropriate integration package, as well as your DSN key to let Sentry know where to send your transaction events to. But in terms of performance monitoring, you have the ability to augment your existing error data, as well as tracing interactions from your front-end application all the way to your back-end application. And with tracing, Sentry allows you to track your software performance, measure metrics such as throughput, latency, as well as display the impact of errors across multiple systems. So with tracing, this really makes Sentry a more complete monitoring solution and really helping you diagnose problems as well as measure your application's overall health more quickly. So before diving even further into the performance UI, as well as providing some context around how Sentry approaches distributed tracing, I just wanted to quickly touch on some of our performance vitals. The first one being web vitals. So Sentry's performance product does give you web vitals out of the box for page load operations. So you may be familiar with these already, but these are essentially the standards that Google has developed that are beginning to impact page ranking in their search algorithm. So you can think of LCP, first input delay, cumulative layout shift, in addition to a few more that are not currently displayed on the screen, but these do come out of the box for Chromium-based browsers. And then something that's relatively new to us is, mobile performance monitoring. So in terms of mobile vitals, we believe there are 4 main metrics that every mobile team should really track to better understand how your application is performing. So cold start, warm start, slow frames, frozen frames. So these are the 4 metrics that are a core part of our mobile performance monitoring to really kind of give you details that you need to not only prioritize critical performance issues, but also be able to trace the issue down to the root cause to solve your mobile-based issues faster. So providing some color around how Sentry approaches distributed tracing. So this kind of just sets the stage as we go through the rest of this workshop and demo. So there's 3 visuals that you see here. The lowest visual is your trace, right? So this is essentially where you as a developer would be interested in instrumenting observability around. So this could be anything from a page load kicked off by a web application, or something that you've instrumented manually, depending on your business logic. And what we're going to be looking at as we go through this demo is specifically a checkout flow. So we do have a sample application, and we'll kind of just go through the flow of how you could essentially, or how Sentry surfaces some important metadata and information and metrics to kind of really support your triaging and resolution process. In regards to mobile, right, this could be anything like a signing in or loading a view in your application. And then if we go one level up, we have our transactions. Transactions can, they usually refer to calls to services where you've instrumented Sentry's performance product. So in this case, this transaction is going to be kicked off by the browser, which is going to be the page load. And then within our transaction, if we were to go into a more granular level, we have our spans. So spans can also represent calls to external services. This is essentially kind of the unit of work that the browser is doing to load the page. To provide some more examples, right, you can think of requesting resources, React component lifecycle events. But going back to kind of the visual that we're looking at here, right? So we can see that our front-end application is making a call to our backend application. And then this backend application, of course, will have its own atomic unit of work. And we're also seeing the second request, right, to an external service. Again, just making sure that it's clear that, we're having Sentry instrumented within this external service as well. And then from there, right, once we finish this full cycle, these spans are then packaged up, sent to Sentry with not only span level detail, but any sort of metadata that you want attached to it. So any sort of custom tags to kind of help support your triaging process with Sentry. Awesome. Just shifting gears now. So you may have seen this application before if you've been in any of our other demos, but this is essentially our sample web application that we use to really kind of showcase the value behind Sentry's performance as well as error monitoring tool. So in my web application, when we talk about tracing, this really means being able to follow a request from my front end to my backend application, as well as pulling in data from any sort of background tasks. So let's go ahead and just kind of take a look at two specific transactions. So the first one is in regards to page load latency, essentially, which is what we're going to be taking a look at within my performance page. And the second one is going to be in relation to a checkout transaction. So if we navigate to my products page, we can kind of right away see that there's some sort of slowness, latency going on, right? So that's the first transaction that we're interested in. So if we take a look at my network tab, my network traffic, essentially right at the bottom here, this is the transaction that gets shipped up to Sentry in regards to page load. So that's the first transaction we're going to be diving into. Second transaction, as I mentioned, is in relation to a checkout, right? So let's go ahead and attempt to purchase a couple of items. Let's proceed to checkout. Again, we're seeing some sort of latency in my application. And what we should see, exactly, so we should see that we ran into some sort of error, right? So this is expected. Again, my transaction gets shipped up to Sentry as well as potentially any errors that were captured. So let's go ahead and navigate, let's hide this video panel. Okay. Yeah, so let's go ahead and kind of dive in and take a look at what Sentry is essentially surfacing to me in terms of these transactions. So again, if you're familiar with the performance product, you may notice that the UI is slightly different. I believe we have rolled this out to early adopters, but in case this is not familiar to you, this new UI is essentially here to provide a more customizable performance landing page. So it's really kind of designed to have a better control over what type of metrics are surfaced to you. So previously, you may have seen some sort of metrics around transactions per minute, app deck score, as well as now being able to see a few more interesting data points that you may have not had insight to previously. So for example, in this case, I've displayed P75 duration. Maybe you're interested in a different threshold, right? Maybe P95, right? So this is essentially going to plot my data based off of this threshold and then compare it to the last. So in this case, we're looking at the last 24 hours. So that's essentially what we see in this graph here. And then below that, we also have these sort of mini lists and charts kind of there to really surface what are my top transactions that I should be looking to. In this case, what were the most regressed? So what were some of my transactions that actually became worse? There's a few other options, right? So most improved. So this is going to show me what are those transactions that actually had a positive impact, right? And then on the right-hand side, again, another kind of list of, in this case, showing me what are my most related issues, right? So what are the transactions that have the most instances of an individual issue? So I can either go into the transaction or I can go into the error itself. So going down below here, so again, for the folks that are familiar with the performance product, this shouldn't be anything new, but below you can see a list of all the transactions that you've captured. In this case, right, tying this back to my sample application, the first transaction we were interested in seeing was in regards to any sort of latency within my application. So I can dive into the transaction. And now this is taking me to my transaction summaries page. So from here, we can see quite a bit of information, right? So some of my slower transactions, suspect tags. So if there's any tags related to or that are contributing to the slowness of this transaction, as well as some more metrics, right? They're displayed here to support my understanding of what could be contributing to any sort of latency in my application. So just clicking into one of these, just so that we have a better kind of understanding of how do we go about really triaging and figuring out where in my application I should be making a fix. So right away, right, we have our span level details. We have this sort of mini map at the top. You can kind of just like zoom in on different areas, which kind of helps break down the span level detail. And right away, we can kind of see that the span is taking quite a bit of time, which is why I would kind of double down and take a look at what kind of information is Sentry providing me about this span, right? So I can see that there was actually a child transaction, right? So it's telling me that there may be an issue coming from my backend application. So if you click on view transactions, you can actually now see the transaction that was captured within my backend application, right? So we've gone from understanding that gone from first looking at my transaction from my front-end application, and now it's taking me into the span level detail for my backend application. So again, right, it's giving me all this context, all this, there's some nesting going on. We can see there's quite a bit of, long spans. And then below here, we have, just more context, right? So from here, I can kind of pinpoint where exactly is the slowness coming from, right? So in this case, we can kind of immediately see, which select query is taking quite a bit of time. So just taking a quick step back, just so that we can kind of level set. Sentry does use head-based tracing. So when we do decide to capture a front-end transaction, we also capture transactions all the way through the platform. So from here, right, we can kind of see exactly which application I should be looking at. In this case, it's my backend application. I know where exactly I should be looking at. It looks like it's some sort of, query that I should be taking a look at and double downing on. And that's kind of where Sentry is really showcasing the value of, not only was I able to kind of start from, a front-end transaction, I was able to pinpoint that the issue actually stemmed from a backend application. So going back to my main dashboard, right, just to kind of drive the value a little bit further. So if we go into my all transactions page, I had mentioned previously, right, there are these sort of new lists that are now surfaced in this performance UI. So previously, you may have had to go through a similar flow of clicking on the transaction, and then from there going into a transaction summaries page, and this being able to figure out that there were actually some errors associated with my transaction. But with this new performance UI, you can actually surface quite a bit of information that can essentially remove a lot of the steps that you may have previously done to triage and resolve your transactions. So for example, so that second transaction we were interested in previously was our checkout transaction, right? So right away, we can see that there are some errors associated with it. And from here, I can actually just dive into my issue. So again, those that are familiar with the error monitoring portion of Sentry, this should be relatively familiar, right? So this is my error. And with tracing enabled, I have this view full trace option. So if I click on view full trace, this is now going to show me not only was there a transaction in my front end application, there was again a backend issue here. And the fact that both of these are highlighted, we can see that there was an error that actually generated both in my front end and back end application. So not only does Sentry allow you to correlate or see how an error in one service may have propagated to another, but it's also, providing you, more insight and stronger insight into which services may be having a negative impact on your application's overall performance. Awesome. So shifting gears now into Discover and dashboards. So if you're not familiar with the Discover tool, it is our Power BI tool that allows you to query and take a look at metadata that either you've collected or automatically collected, and be able to discover patterns, trends, anomalies. So let's go ahead and just quickly build a query. So again, here at the top, something that you may be familiar with, right? So you can essentially query across all your projects, environment types, right? So maybe as a developer, you're interested in just understanding, what are some, anomalies that I can pick up on in regards to staging environment, right? Or maybe you're a team lead, maybe you want to understand what is the overall impact across all of my microservices. Essentially, you can kind of customize this depending on what you're interested in. But below here, you have this columns option. It's kind of where you would go to build out your query. And sticking to the same kind of conversation around performance, let's say, one query that does come up quite a bit is understanding what are some of my failing transactions. So in this case, I would want to know, which project this is coming from. I would, of course, want to know the transaction. And in this case, I would also want to know the failure rate. Let's go ahead, hit apply. We can select my projects and let's say last 30 days. Let's say I'm interested in understanding the last billing cycle. And if you click on any of these, it'll essentially filter based off of that value. So in this case, I want to know what are my top transactions that have the highest failure rate, right? So now this is giving me that context. I can see, which transaction should I be as a developer or maybe a lead, we should be really focusing on or targeting to resolve. And then from here, right, if you're, again, not familiar with Discover or dashboards, so dashboards is our visualization tool that allows you to take, again, the data across performance monitoring, error monitoring, and visualize it, right? So in this case, let's say we're interested in going beyond just creating a table for our transactions. I want to visually see what does the impact look like for my transactions. So in this case, you can go ahead and add dashboard or either create a new one from scratch. So in this case, let's create a new one. Let's call this failing transactions. And in this case, I want to copy over my table, right? So we can see that the column values are already pre-populated for us. We can see that it's sorting by descending. Go ahead, add this as a widget, right? And then now this is taking me into my dashboards feature. So as I mentioned, dashboards is our visualization tool, again, across all of your data, the same sort of filters provided at the top. But to provide more kind of context and value behind this, so there's, again, multiple different types of visualization displays that you can choose from. So by default, it's showing this line chart, right? So maybe in this case, I want to know what is the users affected or what does the user impact look like for my slow transactions, right? So that's, again, another one that comes up quite a bit. So in this case, I'm going to be using the world map visualization display. And let's call this users affected by slow transactions. So again, right, our visualization display is a world map. And let's do count unique users because I want to know what is the impact look like for my unique users. And then in this case, we want to determine the transaction duration. Let's say this is going to be greater than 4,000 milliseconds. Hit enter, right? So now it's going to show me that within the United States, this is what that user impact looks like, right? So from here, you can go ahead, add the widget. We can say shift demo, right? Save and finish. And essentially, you'll see all of these sort of widgets that are displayed within a single dashboard. So really just kind of wanted to before closing things out, just provide some more context here. Just recap what we've gone through so far. So, we started off with understanding how Sentry approaches distributed tracing, right? We went into my sample application, captured some transactions, We saw how to triage our transactions, how Sentry correlates transactions and errors. And then from there, right, we got to kind of quickly see how do we build out a query from the Discover page, and then how do we visualize my data through dashboards. And then from there, right, it's more of an iterative process where you can fine tune and figure out, what metrics, what values are important to your team to really improve your overall application's health. And that's it from me. Dorothy, do you have any questions? Any last thoughts?
We do. Thank you, Nandita and Aaron and Karan. This was super helpful information, I know, for me. But yes, we do have 10 minutes left for questions. A few did come in. One came in for you, Aaron, while you were speaking. Are you just logging when exceptions are triggered or important events as well?
Yeah, so as you could probably see from the presentation, we're fans of using tools specifically for the purposes that they were designed. For important events, I think that we can probably divide that up into a couple different buckets. There could be things like business events. Like for us, a business event might be somebody booked a test drive. Another event could be something related to more systems stuff, like say that we had a job that triggered that, I don't know, process a certain number of records, and we might want to know when that happens from the engineering side only, though, right? But for both of those cases, I'm not sure that Sentry exactly is the right tool for that. I think that you guys at Sentry might have a way to might have some thoughts that you probably want to chime in a minute. But for business metrics, we use another system called Segment to track those events. And that allows us to give our product managers a view into things that are important to them, right? Our pest chat is up today over yesterday, or what kind of trends we can find. I don't know, Sentry, do you guys have any thoughts on tracking other metrics?
Yeah, I can provide some context. So I think in terms of how Sentry approaches tracking metrics and kind of the best approach for that, we generally stick to allowing you to customize whatever you want to send to Sentry. We heavily rely on our Discover and Dashboards feature to really kind of pinpoint areas within your application to kind of surface. So I would say those are probably the two ways to really kind of deep dive and really understand what are those areas, and your developers, product managers, product owners to really kind of surface and understand your overall data collection in terms of transactions, to performance related issues, and errors that come in. So I would say those two are kind of the main ways to target those metrics.
Awesome. Thank you both. Next question. I think this might be for Karan, but Aaron, feel free to chime in. When does a code base need to evolve from a monolithic architecture to a microservices one?
Yeah, this is a really good question. We could spend a whole podcast just on this question. But the thing is, it's, the way to think about this is, most companies, you should start with a monolith, right? Like you have to basically keep in mind the business impact of the tech that you're responsible for. And usually the best way to achieve that is, start with a simple monolith. You have everything in one code base. You can iterate really quickly because, multiple services and servers, they do have some communication and management overhead, right? So while it may be interesting to, have a service-oriented architecture and so on, I would just caution that, proceed consciously, be very thoughtful about what you really need at what stage of the company. So coming to the exact question, right? So when you see teams that are starting to step on each other's toes, when they're depending on each other a bit too much for their code releases, when you're having PR conflicts that maybe don't, necessarily need to happen, but they're happening just because of the way the code is structured. Like these are the kinds of things where you need to start thinking about, okay, maybe it's time to start bifurcating the code and creating different services or different smaller servers. Maybe it's time to look into lambdas and so on, and use all of these new technologies that are available to us now pretty easily, right? When you maybe have different scalability needs for different components of your application, like, so that's another example, right? When you have different release timelines. So for example, you have maybe, the consumer facing application is seeing a lot more releases because people are iterating a lot more in that, in the user interface. Maybe there are a lot more experiments going on. So then, every time you push code, essentially the entire app has to get reset, cycled. So that may be another example where if you're seeing a lot of that happening, you may want to break things up. As an example of that, like most companies, pretty early, they do need an internal admin dashboard. So if you start seeing that the load there is increasing, you may want to extract that out into a separate app. So these are the kinds of things that, once you start noticing them in your, in your application, in your business, that's when you need to think about, okay, it's time to start breaking things out. I would just caution that, like don't go at it, like don't break things out too much too quickly. Just think about it really hard about what exactly should be extracted out at what point, because there are both, pros and cons with having multiple services. I hope that answers the question, but Aaron, if you want to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, towards Karan's last point, I've seen situations kind of in the past where, things have really gotten out of hand. And, I was at a place for during 1 year, we expanded from 80 microservices to 120. And from a developer's perspective, the experience in trying to test the entirety of what your changes are was really, really difficult. And to the point where there were internal systems developed so that people can stand up entire development environments where they run their version of their own, the service that they're working on locally in their computer. So, I mean, you open yourselves up to a lot of different problems by expanding too far. It's all about being reasonable, having kind of a balanced approach to it. And certainly the telltale signs that Karan mentioned are I think some of the biggest reasons why we think we should move to microservices. I'll add to that, in some ways, well, especially for us as a business, we interact with so many different external APIs that we can kind of consider those to be services as part of this large ecosystem of things that operate our application too. And as you start to kind of build experiences with that, you figure out the network reliability of those things. All of those things can contribute to your collective organization's level of experience with multi-service environments, and help you make that decision better.
Awesome, thank you. This next question is also for Karan or Aaron, either one of you. Question came in: how do you handle testing calls or events from local development? Is it on a separate Sentry account? Just wondering for the purposes of not hitting your account limit for the account used in production. And then if you have any advice on using source maps within a mono repo that is not using versioning, that would be great to share.
Maybe so the first part of that, typically for us, testing calls and local development usually don't exhaust our quotas, and so we don't typically have a problem there. So I'm sorry I couldn't give more insight into that particular one, but perhaps the second question, Karan, you could take that one.
Yeah, I think actually Sentry might have best practices for, like, Nandita, you might want to speak to, like, what's the best practice for local development to answer that question.
Yeah, I can.
Yes, but you're probably the better person to answer.
Yeah. So I can definitely touch on some best practices in terms of how to even just like set up. I think another question that also comes up a lot is, how do I set up my Sentry org in terms of microservices? So in terms of having a local deployment, I would say you could keep it within the same Sentry org, same Sentry project, since we do have an environments field, right? So you can always customize, the data that's displayed or what you're looking at based off of the environment type. In terms of managing how you could better manage your quota, right now we are working on some features internally. There's no projected timeline in terms of when we're going to kind of release specific features in terms of how would you manage your quota, maybe based on projects. But I would say there shouldn't be any sort of issue creating a single project with multiple different environments. In terms of managing your quota, there's always server side as well as SDK side filtering that can allow you to essentially cap and manage, how many events are being sent to Sentry. But in terms of best practices, if it's based off environment, it's completely normal. And what we see for other customers is having the same project, multiple different environments shouldn't really cause any sort of issue.
Awesome. And I know we're at time. We have one last question I do want to get to. And this question is for you, Aaron, but I would say anyone can chime in. Do you have a favorite piece of functionality in Sentry? For example, we recently discovered the usefulness of the release feature. It very quickly went from an unknown feature to bread and butter.
That one's definitely a really good one. I think for me, being able to look at the whole system and seeing the current health is the top level priority for me. And because of that, things like stacked graphs to be able to see errors over a timeline from multiple different services is probably the number one piece. Quick assessments of like, is everything okay or not is kind of my priority. But I agree with the release one. It's definitely a very valuable feature.
Awesome. I will not take up any more time. Thank you so much, Aaron and Karan, and everyone who was able to join today. Just a reminder, again, this is recorded. We will share this out with everyone. And if you can just take a couple seconds after this to answer those questions at the end of the survey, that would be fantastic. But thank you, everyone, for your time, and we will be in touch and hope to see you at the next one. Bye.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, and thanks
Thanks.
for having us. This was great.
Anytime.
Thank you.